Previously on Popping Collars.
We try to find as many, I think, positive stories for kids, especially in scripture, as possible. And you start to realize that there really aren't that many. And that's why you kind of rush to Christmas as quickly as possible, because that's like the one that's like really good, right? Like a baby gets born, so that's awesome. And then they ask like, oh, well, what happens to that baby? Like, he died.
But you're out of school on Good Friday, so you might not even be aware.
That happens all the time. It's like, you know, you do like Moses parting the Red Sea, and it's like, oh, cool. So he makes it to the Promised Land? No, he died.
Welcome to Popping Collars, a podcast that lives at the intersection between religion and pop culture, the show where priests, pastors, ministers, and religious thinkers from around the country weigh in on what people are binge-watching, tweeting about, trolling on message boards, and celebrating on blogs. My name is Greg Knight, I am in Palm Beach, Florida, and I am the host to a party of one. That's right, it's just me today for a very special edition. Our podcast is now a year old, and this is our 25th episode, and there's something kind of unbelievable about that to us. So we're going to do what all the good sitcoms told us to do when we were growing up, a recap show. We've done 10 episodes on television shows, 5 episodes on movies, 1 sad, lonely little episode on music, and 8 in the general hazy world of pop culture. It's been a great journey with some amazing guests. The show will be the end of our first season. If you've been with us the whole way, thank you so much for listening. If you've just joined us for the last few episodes, go back and take a listen to the rest of our shows. Season 2 will launch in the very near future. I promise we won't take as much time off as Serial or Invisibilia. In the meantime, check out these highlights from our past 24 episodes.
The question that I have is, how does this help us inform our Christian studies? I mean, this idea we learn from society that we go through these ebbs and flows and layering and layering and layering and then deconstructing and then layering and layering and layering and then deconstructing. Where does that take us when we look at our biblical studies?
Some people would bristle to hear you talk about the Bible in a sort of mythological, because that means unicorns and Pegasuses and whatever. No, that's not what we're talking about. That inside every mythology, there's truth at its kernel, right. And there's something that people are looking for and striving for. So, kind of, what is the truth that's being communicated in this extra fantastic long lives or fantastic strengths, or what is this really saying about what humanity values, what they love, and who they think the creator is? And so that kind of allowing them to move past mythology being a dirty word, being a word that means fake, to being, well, actually, it actually means something much, much different and much, much deeper. So don't dismiss it, embrace it, and dig deeper.
In the narrative of the movie, Bing Bong, the imaginary friend, sacrifices himself, so the joy isn't forgotten. Mm-hmm. Oh man,
Christ figure.
That's a sermon, right?
Christ figure.
Sacrificing yourself so the joy isn't forgotten. Yeah, and I'm sure at some point he had himself in the cruciform while he was on the back of the wheelbarrow with the arms out.
Well, and when
it is finished, joy.
Well, when you think about the Psalms and the way they talk about the pit and the miry pit and being forgotten, and can you ever be so far from God that God doesn't see you and God doesn't know you? I mean, I think envisioning that kind of pit of forgottenness it's an interesting way to think about that, and how much we work so hard to not be forgotten and to actually be forgotten. That's frightening.
It's not the hero that you expect to be doing this. It's the person that you kind of least expect, right? This girl sacrificing her life for everyone, for the redemption of of the world, right?
Yeah, and she's not the first. She's, the latest in a long line of young women who have done this.
Which makes the piece at the very end, and here comes the big spoiler, the very last episode, when she finally gets it, that the trick to conquering the first, which is the big evil, like the biggest evil, the first evil that there ever was, the reason why the Slayer line came into existence, the trick to conquering that first is not to keep the power or to even take more power for herself.
To share it.
To disseminate her power.
Yeah. Right.
And give it to all the potential Slayers.
Yeah, like who says it just has to be one? That's what the hierarchy has said. But
yeah.
What if we can change that? And that made all the difference.
The whole series ends with Pentecost then.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a Pentecost kind of day down there in the Hellmouth.
And I think that's probably at the very end there, the very end of the last episode, when, the city has disappeared into this pit. That's the first time she really smiles. She relaxes and she smiles.
That's what allows Don to continue to be a compelling character, even though he's a pretty terrible person, is because, and I think not only for the audience, but for the other people in Don's life, because his advertising genius depends upon this incredible wisdom about human nature and human relationships. And that wisdom that he has, that insight that he has, it's authentic and it's real, but he, like all advertising, uses it to manipulate, and to uses it for his own ends rather than using it to authentically connect with other people.
Right, and in the end, you called it. In the end, that's exactly what he does. And I also quickly grew tired of Don, in part because I'm naturally very hopeful and sort of optimistic, and so dark television is never that appealing to me because I don't get it. And so with Don, every season I legitimately thought, this is it. He's changing. He's going to be a good man now, or he's going to be happy and he's going to love truly. And I really, truly thought it was going to happen, and it didn't. And there's something to learn from that type of experience, about myself and just about people in general, that, sometimes people are what they are. You have to choose when to invest and when not to invest. And everybody around Don would have known that about him. Really. He really wasn't fooling anybody at the end of the day. He was a mess. He was a train wreck, and everybody knew it. But he was handsome, and so he got away with a lot.
Saturday Night Live ran a bit during Weekend Update, and it was talking about sort of how the Jinx, as a cultural phenomenon, has kind of glorified serial killers. And they ran the opening to the show, and then they put "This is how we do it" over the top of it. And I didn't actually see it on the show. I saw it this morning on a morning news show. And so they show the clip and they cut to the reporters, and the reporters are like, well, I don't think the families of the victims are going to like that. I sort of caught myself in this moment of oh yeah, this is kind of real. This is a real thing. These are real people that died. And that's the thing about even Serial. At some point, oh yeah, that's right, they're not characters.
Right.
Heyman was an actual person.
Well, and her brother, allegedly, it may not have really been him, sort of came out on a Reddit thread and said that very thing. For you, my sister is a character in this mystery, but you didn't lose her, and you didn't see my mother crying every day. And that is a reminder that we all kind of need, that other people's suffering should not be entertainment for us. It can be educating, I think, appropriately. So I thought about that with Serial, and then I felt dirty about it with the Jinx.
There's one episode that I always fall back on when I'm trying to describe what it is that I love about Breaking Bad, and that's the Fly episode.
Yes.
And the reason is because this is where we see Walter at his happiest, I would say. He's finally attained heaven. He has the perfect meth lab. He has the perfect setup. He has as much control as he will ever have at any point in the show. And during the course of this episode, in his sealed meth lab, a small fly inserts itself in, and he spends the entire episode trying to get rid of this fly. And actually, I guess the course of the episode takes place just in the meth lab. It doesn't go anywhere else. It's just Walter in there trying to eliminate the fly. And the reason that he tells Jesse that he's trying to do this is because the fly can contaminate. The fly represents contamination, but the fly also represents that little thing, that little piece of chaos that's always going to exist in Walter's life that he's never going to be able to get rid of. And I feel like that's so often how I see sort of sin playing out in people's lives, is that it's that thing it's that little fly that's kind of bugging people in their lives, and it seems like it's the thing that they focus on, and they either kind of give themselves over to, or they're trying desperately to get rid of it, and in turn actually following down this path of like pursuing it and like picking at it, like, like an imperfection on a sweater or something like that. And it just becomes this subversive thing that kind of takes over people's lives. But it's a little thing that becomes a huge thing, that becomes this great downfall. That's it. That's the evil that exists on the show. And how great that, evil is just a little fly. It's just this little thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's the whole show in one episode.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. If you're going to watch only one, The Fly is the one to choose.
People of the planet, we can bring it back, but we gotta understand it.
And yet sin is not sin, but our separation of ourselves from God. And when we fall into these cycles, the cycles that have us repeating the errors of our ways, when we're told to turn away, we're told to break those cycles, but we get stuck in them. And what I'm hearing, I really appreciate this part of the conversation, and what I saw in the show was that there are times you just can't break the cycles, but every now and then there's someone who's able to break that cycle and maybe go into some form of redemption. What is encouraging is that through Christ we can come to that place where we can break those cycles, but not to be fooled that it's going to be easy. I think the real redemption was looking at Bugs, who was 5 seasons. For 5 seasons, 4 of those seasons, he is redeems himself. He becomes a confidential informant. He gets some money, and then he slides back in. He's doing drugs. One of the more heartbreaking scenes I remember is when he goes to, I think it's his sister's house, and she won't even let her daughter, his niece, talk to him, because you can see in the pain of her eyes. And for those who have dealt with, lived with people in addiction, they know it. I love you. You're my brother. You're my cousin. You're my mom. You're my dad. You're my son. You're my daughter. But I can't have you lie and steal from me anymore. Mm-hmm. Just in that 2 seconds, you saw that in her face. And he's trying to at the same time say, I'm stopped. I'm not going to do this anymore. And yet, how many times has that person heard that? How many times have we heard that? Mm-hmm. But the redemption is there if he's able to break that cycle. And in this case, he's one of the few people that actually is able to break that cycle.
And I like that idea of, good things follow bad things, good things follow good things. Because the character where it seems like bad things follow bad things follow bad things, or at least strange things follow strange things, is the dude. Like, it seems like he's on this cycle the minute he loses his rug, where it's just bad thing after bad thing after bad thing. And yet by the end of the film, he's able to sort of look back and say, gutters and strikes, ups and downs, that's how he kind of frames his world. Even though it looks like he's just had one bad thing after another, he sees it as all kind of a wash in the end. He's not necessarily affected, and that may sort of speak to who the dude is, but I think it also sort of shows a little bit of how his arc worked in that movie, that he was able to kind of let go of everything having to be perfect, of the rug having to pull the room together, the plans all working out exactly right, people knowing that he was one Lebowski and the other Lebowski was a different Lebowski. He was able to let all of that go, and in the end, just,
abide.
It's a silent wind that never really blows. I'm letting go.
And so there's just so much kind of in the body, because that's what we have. This is what we have. This is what cosmic things I've been lent this time. And so that's, aside from being removed, my body being removed and out of the garden, and you can't be here anymore, that so much of it is that body focus. And where I want to go, especially in working with teenagers, is really talking about that stewardship of creation piece, that dominion that we all are given, the dominion to respect one another's bodies, to not put one another down, to not violate the boundaries that people are giving us in terms of how we are together, either in a relationship or, in social media or whatever it's going to be. That you are a steward not only of the little birds and the trees and the stuff, but all of creation, all of humanity, all of those bodies.
I'm letting go.
The Robin Williams stuff that came out this past week when he died is as an example of this. It's not an example of evil necessarily, but it is an example of people needing to find something to blame for something that they don't understand. They don't understand why a man who made them laugh for so long killed himself. And so it's just constantly, is it depression? Is it Parkinson's? Is it drugs? Is it drinking? It's what's the source of blame that we can find to figure this out in our mind? Where I always keep falling back on, scripturally speaking, is the book of Ecclesiastes, which would ultimately tell you it's life, man. That's what it is. It's the world that we live in, and there's your answer. To quit trying to find all the things to blame and accept that this is what it means to be a living being on this world.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the Robin Williams stuff, because all those things that you named, what do we call them? Battling your demons, right? That's what we call them. And that, knowing we were going to talk about this, and then having, the terrible tragedy of his loss, and people trying to have conversations about mental illness and addiction, but you're othering it when it's, battling your demons, and as opposed to saying, these are illnesses, these are things that are of me and made of me, and how do I address them in a way that's concrete, as opposed to kind of demonizing them. See, and it just jumps out the cliches.
Tricky Diesel.
Anything can happen. Anything can happen on a sports field. It doesn't matter what narrative you've created for yourself. It doesn't matter if you're a Cornhusker and you're the good guys that need to beat the bad guys that are the other team. The final score is going to be what it's going to be, and maybe you're going to lose. But the struggle, I think, becomes when we lose, where is the justice? Where is the justice when we lose? And that's when people start to drive themselves crazy. And I think that sports brings that out, because there isn't that there isn't that predetermined quality. There isn't that script. Like, the script would be that the Lakers would win every season, right? But that script doesn't exist. Like, they're not going to win every season.
Well, I haven't cared much about the Lakers since, like, maybe 1990.
There was really one show that was a utopia, and that was Star Trek. That was the one show that said, you know, humanity figured it out. We got it right. We ended up working together, and we explored the galaxy. And then post 9/11, Star Trek was gone, and in its place were a lot of these kind of dystopian stories. And I think that we're still kind of processing crises in American pop culture.
Well, I mean, other than, you know, like the Trek reboot, you know, that's happening. But there you still get, you know, these bad guys who are kind of nihilistic people, you know, that there's something about bringing in chaos and wiping things away and, you know, all of that kind of stuff that would just have there will come this judgment, you know, and then it's also seeing these events as judgment. I just watched Guardians of the Galaxy. Super fun movie. But, you know, the baddie Ronan in that, I mean, he even calls himself a zealot. He's like, I'm coming in here and we're going to, you know, it's going to be my justice. And this is what it looks like. And with a mechanism that can wipe out a planet or wipe out a people, wipe out or anything organic. I think there's also this element too that, you know, as we're also confronting global warming and things like that there's this idea that the earth will always sustain, you know, for at least, you know, maybe longer than humanity will. And that there's something about that we're very drawn to seeing iconic things we love, things we recognize being overgrown and the kind of ruin type situation, that there's something that is very hypnotic about that. I mean, we see it with, you know, post-Katrina type stuff and people being interested in things like that. But that there's something about kind of having our icons of the world kind of torn asunder. And, you know, there's the Statue of Liberty leaning.
The Daleks have this concept of beauty, and that blew my mind. It never occurred to me in all my years of watching Doctor Who that Daleks would have a concept of beauty. And so, and it's one of the things that one of the Daleks says, I can't remember the exact quote, but they say, you know, part of their concept of beauty is that they find beautiful, pure hatred. And maybe that's one reason why the Daleks have never been able to destroy the Doctor. That there's something of him that is pure hatred that they see, and they find him beautiful for it. So that was just mind-blowing for someone who grew up as a kid, just, you know, assuming that Dalek equals exterminate.
Right.
That they actually have a sort of Augustinian aesthetic. You know, they find beauty within their world, and they desire, you know, they can't bring themselves to destroy what is beautiful. So where do they get that idea of beauty? I mean, that's profound.
Like, there's some really sinister pieces to the Disney plot. It's just that nothing sort of bad happens to the princess, right? Like, everything kind of works out. And I think that's where it's hard for us to communicate biblical stories, because it doesn't always work out necessarily, especially Old Testament stories. It doesn't always work out for the people in those stories. And yet we have to kind of accept on faith that God is with these people, even in these dark times.
And, you know, I would argue that perhaps what's needed in our models for Christian education in light of that is not necessarily, you know, an overhaul in the sense of let's do away with these old models, but let's flesh them out a little bit. I mean, maybe you can tell the story of David and Goliath a certain way to your kindergartners and evolve that story a certain way as they get a little older. But then maybe, you know, to your middle schoolers and high schoolers, you start telling more of the story of David. You know, maybe by the time you're in middle school or high school, you can start to talk about, you know, David and Bathsheba and Absalom and really wrestle with the stuff that guy wrestles with, you know, as his rule over Israel. evolves and changes, and his relationship with God evolves and changes from being more than just this young boy with a slingshot, slaying a giant. By the end, David's contending with himself, and I think that's a very relatable thing for a young person, and maybe that's partly where the ball is dropped, is we don't challenge kids at that age and that level of experience with the stories as they are.
Well, it's the difference between, how do we invite them into a genuine experience and how do we invite them into a show? And I'm thinking when I was a kid, we visited one of those Native American pueblos and they did the dancing, which I assume was originally based on some sort of very, holy, sacramental, ritual that, their forebears would have been partaking in. And I don't know to what extent that was true for the actual dancers I saw, but it was just an interesting thing to watch, but it wasn't, I don't know how meaningful it was for either the spectators or the participants. And I think one of the dangers for us is in this new world, this brave new world, is that if we are really good at sort of communicating on social media and sort of being clever and quippy, are we going to totally make church devoid of the holy experience altogether in the name of getting more people to participate in it? And I don't know where the answer is there, but it's one of those questions that it kind of goes rumbling around in my brain.
But nothing irks me like the snarky comment that is meant to diminish another person, and it's able to simultaneously say, like, I don't really care what you think enough to be thoughtful about it. I just know you're dumb and I'm smart, so I'm going to make a little joke at your expense. That irritates me mainly because it doesn't irritate me outside of the church. Like if we were following tweets about like the Academy Awards or something, that would not irritate me at all. In fact, I would think it was funny. But when it comes to the church world and our faith life, to me that's just rude, like you said, Greg, but it borders on shameful. But that snarkiness in church life is, I think, destructive, and it keeps a lot of people out.
And I guess it's the pointedness with which we attack each other that I find distressing. Mm-hmm. To the point that it's not even comedy. It's just being mean and then laughing about it and saying that it was a joke.
Right. And I think that so much of it is about our culture where we all get to be celebrities. Like, we're all criticizing each other as if we're the only ones who have an expertise in a given topic, and the truth is we're not experts most of the time, and neither are the people we're arguing with.
Walking Dead is a great example too. I mean, I come back to that because it's such a good example of it. It's a game that forces you to make bad choices. I mean, you are literally several times forced to make choices between this person A die or person B die, and you can't do both. And so you have to make a choice, and sometimes there's just no other option. I think it's a fascinating way to create a conversation around ethics, though, and that's something that Walking Dead did a great job of.
And the other piece of those Telltale games that I really liked was that they would often put you in situations where you had to make a choice quickly. Yes. Because you had a timer that would sort of count down, that had the amount of time for you to make a choice. And for easy choices, or for choices that didn't necessarily matter, the timer would tick down slowly. But in sort of heightened, sort of action sequences or something like that, the timer would go very quickly. And so you didn't get the opportunity to weigh options. You had to just go with your gut instinct of what you were going to do. And sometimes your gut instinct takes you into some pretty dark territory, it turns out.
I don't see Jax as a Jesus figure, despite the crucifixion, right? The ritualistic crucifixion right at the end, right? Yeah. because it's a sacrifice without the resurrection. You know, it's what Holy Week is without the resurrection. The principalities and the powers win.
Yeah, and Nero isn't a protective figure. Like, Nero's unable. Like, he's trying to extract himself from the gangster life by driving down south to buy his uncle's farm. But you think, is he really?
He's even named after the emperor.
Yeah.
You know,
the original
Kurt
Antichrist.
Sutter. That's right. Kurt Sutter's not all that subtle sometimes.
I found the end a little bit more hopeful, I guess, because I'm an optimist.
Everything you guys are saying, this just happened yesterday. I preached a sermon, and it was probably more vulnerable than I've been with this congregation. I've been here for about a year and 2 weeks. I preached a sermon, and I was a little vulnerable, and people really responded, and it was amazing. It's like you're saying. And I used a song lyric. Here's where I get my street cred. Kendrick Lamar has this newish song called I, and it's basically I love myself, and he talks about, you know, being plagued basically by demons, you know. And I mentioned a scene in the video where he's hanging out of a car, and literally he looks like he's being convulsed by demons. It fit the sermon, right? And he goes from wanting to commit suicide to getting to a point where he says, I love myself. And people really responded. I think sometimes lyrics, when the vulnerable stuff with lyrics is, it can make us feel like, wow, someone else out there is feeling like I'm feeling. But on the flip side, also, I think it kind of makes our lives matter more, kind of like more cinematic or bigger, or I don't know if I'm making sense, but that's how I feel.
We do project this outer shell, you know, that's I think designed to hide what's on the inside. And I do love that last scene of Iron Man 3 and you know, the idea of the cocoon, but, you know, not to borrow from the X-Men, but I always thought of it as sort of rising like the Phoenix, where everything's going up in flames, you know, at the end of that film, whether it be Pepper Potts, you know, who's about to explode, or the villain who does, or, you know, all these suits of armor just get burned. And you're right, what rises is an authentic human being. And I'm not sure that you could say that about him at any other point in any of the films. You know, sort of the quest for being our authentic self, and we can all relate to that in a world where, you know, where things move at a pace that we can't keep track of or keep up with, in a world where, you know, it's increasingly difficult when we're bombarded with advertisement after advertisement and idea after idea to really know who we are. You know, that's an important message, at least at my church, that we, you know, always try to get back to the idea, you know, fundamentally, who are we? You know, we're children of God, and, you know, that's our identity.
Because it's kind of what is society valuing? What are they looking for as being, you know, I value my child going to church. Have I been great at that lately? No, I have not. Have I been beating myself up about it? Heck yes, I have.
Oh, good. Oh, good. I'm glad we were able to instill some guilt in there somewhere along the way.
Yeah.
See, that's what the church has to offer.
Right.
Guilt.
Right, guilt.
Well, and I want to pick up that piece too, because I think that, you know, that's one of the places where we're really suffering in church communities is, you know, we're still operating in that, I think, very conservative, old school and outdated mode of thinking about what a family is and is like. And oftentimes when your family doesn't fit that mold, when the pieces don't line up, then either it's judgment or it's, you know, it's just, you know, not having a schedule that lines up. I mean, we, you know, talking about, you know, young people in the youth group, and, you know, we sort of have to balance, you know, our activity and how we schedule things around, you know, folks' every other weekend with a parent, you know, schedule. You know, how do we make a regular commitment to youth group makes sense for someone who can only be there half the time. And, do they feel like they can only be half a member of the group? Or how do we value them and find a fit for them when there's absolutely no way they're going to be there every single time?
Advertising-wise, we are much closer to the 60s now than we have been for the past 30 years. In that time of perfect family, perfect looking people, very fit, multiculti, all of those things as being portrayed as the perfect advertising family. Whereas, things in the 60s and 70s and probably culminating with like, Where's the Beef? It was more this kind of real people. This is what real people look like and real people doing things. Yeah. And now we're back to, oh, look at everybody. They're so lovely. And it's gotten us used to now doing all of that with much more noise and much more presence from advertising. And I think that's something that so many people in our pews and in the world need to kind of be reflective about, the amount of noise and such that they're willing to put up with. That you tune out pretty easily, or that you say, oh, I'm so happy this is here to distract me from everything else.
That's something that Fisher says, the sort of naive young guard says. You remember she's holding the ladder for Chapman while she's changing a light bulb or something, and she says, this really could have been me, like the only difference between me and you is that you got caught and I didn't. For just a second, it really blurred the lines between the humanity of the guards and the humanity of the inmates. And then that wall went right back up again.
I love the complexity of it, and I love having the rug pulled out from under me, because we are all more complex than we think we are. And having characters who have all those layers like onions and ogres is really good. I mean, it makes the story why you tune in for what is the next thing she's going to peel off.
The rest ain't guaranteed. Life is a gift we get to give. The world is desperate for us. I can't let it get out of my head.
And then you get to the point where you can't really tell the difference. It's like, is that something that I saw in a Cecil B. DeMille film, or is that something that I heard in Sunday school, or is that something that I actually read in the Bible? I don't really know. And you start getting confused about, where the real source is. That's where I start to get, some people see that as a great tragedy, and they say, well, we shouldn't make these films, or we shouldn't see these films, because they're just going to screw with our attempts at understanding the Bible. I think you should just go with it. I think you should enjoy the confusion, because, as far as I'm concerned, Moses looked like Charlton Heston. I can't get that out of my head. Why should I bother? And the golden calf looked exactly like it looks in that final orgy scene, at the bottom of the mountain. So, it just gives us this sort of spectacular images that kind of guide our way of thinking about Scripture.
History repeats itself in the patterns in the stone. We close our eyes and fumbling, we listen or we don't. The anchor man is babbling.
Popping Collars on Twitter at Popping Collars. You can find us on the Facebook, where you can like or friend us. As always, you can find our show at poppingcollarspodcast.com or wherever you find your podcasts. Should that be iTunes, subscribe to our show. That'll help people find us. We are the 1,320th ranked spirituality podcast. As always, we thank the good folks at EpiscopalCafe.com for featuring our show each and every time. And thank you so much for listening to Season 1 of Popping Collars. Season 2 will be coming very soon, so look for that. And in the meantime, keep those collars popped, and we'll see you next time.